This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have New York Times bestselling author B.A. Paris here to talk about her new release, When I Kill You. Welcome, Bernadette.
Thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be speaking to you today.
The delight has been all mine. Every page that I have spent with you in this story has been absolutely phenomenal. But before I run away with all the things that I adored, can you start listeners off with an overview of what the story is about?
It's about a young woman called Elle who looks out of her window one day and sees a crime taking place. And she's the only witness to this crime. And a few months later, she sees who the perpetrator is. Well, she sees him in the street and she tries to tell the police, but they don't believe her. So she decides to go after him with disastrous consequences. And the second part of the story is Elle. 12 years later, she's changed her name. She's been living under a false identity to escape her past. And she's decided to let a few people into her lonely life, beginning to make a few friends, thinking, well, I've paid the price for my past, so now I want to start living again. And then she acquires a stalker.
That storyline, those two timelines that we're working with, both of them are so equally chilling because, as you said, she sees this, what she believes crime is being committed, and she becomes obsessed, really. I would say, I think that's a fair word, with how she's going to respond to that. Mm-hmm. And what I thought was so fun was there's this propulsive nature to that timeline, but the present, like you said, where she's acquired a stalker, is just as propulsive. Where did you get the idea for this story?
Funnily enough, but my daughter actually looked out her window one day in London and saw that crime taking place. And she wasn't sure what she should do. She didn't know whether she'd be wasting the police's time, but she phoned the police anyway and reported what she'd seen. And they said, no, you did the right thing telling us. You know, that's great. And my daughter never heard any more, so she presumed that everything was fine. But when she told me this story, I thought, what if? And as soon as I think, what if, that gives me a whole storyline. And I thought, I think I can make a book out of this. And I'd also had the idea of a stalker novel, and I already had the stalker's voice in my head, and I really wanted to get that down on paper. I had such fun with that, which might be a strange thing to say, but just the voice. I enjoyed the voice.
Well, as strange as it is for you as the author to say it was strange to enjoy writing the stalker, I have to say I adored reading about the stalker. Elle does become pretty obsessed with things. She's a pretty intense personality, I would say. And I was curious, as the story went on, did Elle change at all for you, or was she always the same fully formed character? Because I feel like she reveals so much to us, and we're wondering how much has she changed over the years, and what kind of person is she really?
Well, I think like everybody, when she's young, she's very impulsive and headstrong, and she thinks absolutely that she's right, you know, in the way that young people often do. And there's no way that they are wrong. And she just believes something and she goes for it. But then, because of the consequences of her actions, which weigh heavily on her, she hides herself away. And I think she's definitely a calmer character, but she's also quite withdrawn afterwards because she's scared to let anybody in, even though she's decided that she wants to make a new life for herself, that she wants to start having friends, and she has a new partner in her life. But even so, she's really wary of telling anybody. She doesn't want anybody to find out about her past. She thinks she's going to be judged for it. And so she changes dramatically from being this headstrong, impulsive young woman to being a very mature and slightly withdrawn and she doesn't really trust people. So this all adds into the fact that she now has a stalker.
And I loved how you played with trust in so many ways in both timelines, because in the earlier timeline, she has a relationship as well. And looking at the ways that incident from her past impacted her. I think sometimes in our lives, it's too easy to trust. And some of the things that Elle does later on, I think are actually prudent things, right? One thing in particular that she does around taking cabs, taxis, I thought was actually, given where she lived, a very smart idea. And I thought, wow, a lot of a lot of people could probably benefit from that level of street smarts that she's showing there.
Well, hopefully there's sometimes lessons to be learnt in books, and maybe people will take that on board and be careful when they're taking taxis in future.
Yes, so Bernadette doesn't only give you amazing thrillers, she also gives you life lessons and life hacks in her work.
Hopefully.
Coming back real quick to that idea of obsession, Elle is very driven. And I was wondering, where is that tipping point where, hey, I'm a really driven person. I really want to either achieve at my job or have a good, strong family, whatever it is, whatever my goal is, I'm trying to achieve. Where is that tipping point when we go from being so incredibly driven, which is something that most people around the world would exalt and say that's a great trait? Where do you get past that into unhealthy obsession?
I mean, I like to think that, we are driven. I think when we're young, we all have goals that we want to achieve. And there comes a point when I think we accept that we're not maybe going to achieve all those goals, and we become happy with the life we have. But then some people just become obsessed by something, and they will go on until they try and achieve what they want, and good luck to them. But I think that they probably, if they become so obsessed, they probably push away a lot of people in their lives when they're going after this goal that actually is only their goal, perhaps, and doesn't concern their family or their wider circle of friends. But it's funny because you say obsession, and actually that would have been a brilliant title for my book. And in Poland, they've actually called it obsession because they can't always translate the titles that I have. And they wrote to me and said, we're going to call it obsession. I thought, actually, that's a really good title.
It is a very, very good title because you think a lot about that as the reader. And you think about, hey, what is healthy and what is not? And another thing that you kind of grapple with, and I don't ever want to give spoilers, but you did mention that there's a crime that Elle witnesses through her window. And there has been a large emergence of kind of armchair sleuths that have come up on the internet, folks in their regular everyday lives who follow true crime. And there's been many instances where they have actually helped solve crimes. And I was wondering, did you look into any of that as part of your research, or were you aware of it? And what are your thoughts about folks and how far they should go and putting themselves in jeopardy sometimes to solve these crimes?
Yes, and actually that's what Elle does. She puts herself in jeopardy. But I didn't do any research on that because I just had this idea of Elle being obsessed. I think it can be quite dangerous because you might go completely down the wrong path. And I think it causes a lot of upset to people when you might start accusing them of something and they're not actually the perpetrator of the crime. So I think now it's really, really difficult, and it's quite a delicate balance with people wanting to help the police or wanting to solve and help, but then maybe going too far. And the problem is that, they get other people on the same bandwagon. And then you've got you're hunting this person who, it's happened before, has got nothing to do with it. So I think it can be quite dangerous. I think, people are obsessed with crime in a way, which is quite a scary thing. But people do love to watch crime. They like to read thrillers. And I think, they think, well, maybe I can solve a crime one day. Maybe I can be a detective. Maybe I can do this from the comfort of my armchair.
And it was really interesting to me as well, the way that you crafted the characters around Elle. They are so amazing. And, this is a thriller and it's suspense and there's a mystery at the heart of it. So we're trying to solve the mystery and we're looking at our suspects. And every one of these was so beautifully crafted. It was Agatha Christie style, where you could say any one of these people could be involved in some form or fashion. What was the inspiration for that cast of characters?
I like to work with a small cast of characters because I think it's quite important when you're reading a thriller. You're always you want to guess who the bad person is. And I think it's great for my readers when they are sure that they have the right person, and actually it's not that in the end. And I think that gives them kind of a run for their money because they do like to solve it. And, I get messages from people sometimes who have solved it early on, but the majority of people don't. And I love it, for example, if one of my daughters is reading my book before it comes out, they message me going, I know who it is, it's this person. And I just never reply to anything, even if they've got it right or wrong. Mostly they've got it completely wrong. Or later they change their mind, they go, actually, no, I've just thought, I think it's this person. And I think, no, it's not that person either. But I don't tell them, of course, because I just think it's nice at the end discovering and then going back and thinking about that person and thinking, yeah, of course, the clues were there, but I just didn't see them. But I think, I think if you're reading thrillers, there is that thing you want to try and guess before you're told by the author. So I enjoy doing that. And it's not really to lead people astray, but I think they do like that game, that kind of cat and mouse game a little bit.
They do. And what was so fun was your reveal in the end was spectacular. And what I loved about it was sometimes the author gives you the reveal, they pull back the curtain, and then, the credits roll on the film and it's over. And it's like, well, wait a minute. And you did something so wonderful. You went back and showed us. We didn't have to flip through the pages and try to find why and go back. You kind of told us why. And I love that so much. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed that. But I do think it's nice to tie up the ends for the readers, because I think often if they're not tied up, they think, well, I still don't get it really. So I think it's good. And I think that I came up with a good way of doing that, to tie up the ends at the end of the story, just so readers will know why, because I think that's really important that they know why, that it's not just something that's plucked out of the air.
One of the other things I wanted to ask you about, and I have a suspicion about the answer on this, but I wanted to check with you. One of your or a couple of your characters have ties to France, even though this story is taking place in London. And I was wondering if that had anything to do with your own background and why some of those characters might have those ties.
Yeah, absolutely. I do like to it's funny because although I've lived in France for most of my life, I now live in the UK, but I lived in France for nearly 40 years. And yet my books are always set in the UK. I don't know why. I've never set a book in France, not for the moment anyway. And although there might be parts of my book, that are in France, a character might, as in this one, When I Kill You, there is a little bit where a character goes back to Paris and everything, but they don't feature heavily. They never take place. And I just think my last few books have had people going to Paris, people going to France, because I think it's just such a part of me that I need to get into the book somewhere. And also I just think it makes a change to have characters that are from different backgrounds. So I think it makes it more interesting for readers as well. So, and maybe to see what a little bit of life is like amongst a group of French people, because of course I experienced that. It's very different to how groups of English people function maybe. So, I'm talking about having people to dinner. It's just a completely different thing. So I just think it's nice to give people little insights into France and how people might live or might act there.
And one of my favorite things that I loved was Elle is sometimes looking at these folks that are in her inner circle and making judgments about some of the women. And I thought it was so funny. She throws out thoughts like sophistication and all of these things that I think are very common, how other women perceive French women culturally. And we, whether it's the fashion or this or that, and we just think, oh, they're so chic and wonderful. And it was so cute how you integrated that outside perspective.
Yeah, I think it's just interesting because they are slightly more formal. Even among my really good friends in France, if you go around to dinner, it's more formal than it is just having people around here and eating in the kitchen. It's just a different way. And of course, when you're confronted with that at first, so Elle is very much confronted with that because her new partner is half French and he has his sister living in London. So she gets involved in that little French world, and there's so many French people living in London. So I just thought it was interesting. I think it's always, I like it when I read a book and I find out something I don't know, or I'm introduced to a different set of rules and regulations about, that take place in other countries. I just think it just adds a little bit extra to a story.
And what was so fun was, as I talked about, the way that you made everyone a suspect. That device of having characters who sometimes are popping back onto back to France, it puts a little more mystique. What are they doing when they're there? Who are they when they're there?
Exactly.
You really gave us so much to think about in that way. And it was a fun thing because who knows? They're out of country. What's going on?
That's it. And when they come back and you don't know where they are for a few hours, what have they been doing in those few hours? And I think that's always interesting. I use that a little bit in my book as well. So, yes, and it does give you that, people do wonder, what were they doing front? Were they really just going there to work or to see their family? Or was there something else going on? So I just think, that all adds to the mystique in the story and make people think, and it just throws more light on people. They become more suspect, I think.
And what was so fun was, as you mentioned, Alex, the man that she's in a relationship with, even when he's going to France and there's all these lovely ladies around, well, what's going on there? So even if he's not up to anything really, really bad, is he still up to something with some of the other ladies? We don't know.
No, that's it. Good. I'm glad you enjoyed that part of it.
I did. Like I said, there was just so much in this book that was absolutely perfect in every way. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about was setting. You are so masterful with setting. In the present time, we spend a bit of time in two places, her workplace and her home. And her home, I don't know if this was based on a place you know. I'm not going to give necessarily spoilers, but the kitchen in particular has some interesting aspects to it. And I just fell in love with that. And I was curious, is this based on a place you know? Did you see this and think, oh, here's a what if? Or was it just something you came up with because it worked for the story?
The location, I knew. I walked past it and I thought that's a perfect location. It's actually, her house is in a little news street in London. And my daughter happens to live in an area where there's lots of those little streets, and I was walking past and I had to walk down it, and I thought, this is perfect. This is exactly what I need, where, a very narrow mews road with no way out at the bottom. A car has to turn around, do a 64-point turn to be able to get back out or back down. But the inside I just did it's kind of based on houses I've lived in, all the houses, and I can't really say, but the set out inside, the way the rooms are placed with the corridor, maybe the room. I've always kind of based it on a house I know or something. So and the kitchen, that was something I knew as well. I'm not going to give too much away for the readers.
And I will say, coming back to your style of storytelling and the way you played with those two timelines, you started off with a very repulsive scene, really a terrifying scene, and you grabbed us completely as the reader and didn't let go from there. That whole thing was a through point that was so brilliant. And you used, again, I don't want to spoil for anyone, you used this other device, and there were 4 words that you would repeat, kind of like a train driving down the tracks. And it tied back to that opening scene, and it was just so brilliant. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry to gush, but oh my gosh, it was so good. Where did the idea come from?
For that device, well, for the opening scene, I think it's really important to hook your readers straight away. I think it's, if I had started with the first chapter afterwards, I might not have drawn people in so much. I just think it's really good to have a powerful scene. And again, it's a device I've used before where I take a scene from further on in the book and then just put it out front as well, so that when they actually hit the same scene in the book, they'll see why. But I use that really because I think it really is important. If somebody's opening up a book in a bookstore and they're just reading the first page, you need to hook them in. Otherwise, they're just going to put it back on the shelf and they won't buy it. So you're hoping to hook your reader in. And as for the other device, I just had a lot of fun with that. I had a lot of fun. A few years ago, I thought about writing a stalker book. I tried and it didn't come to anything, but there was that in it. And I never discard what I don't use. I always keep it somewhere because I think one day, and I kept thinking one day I do want to get that into a book. So when I had this idea of Elle, then I thought, I can do that. And so it was great because I really had a ready-made thing that I could use. So and I'm glad I've used it because I do think it's scary, but it's kind of fun as well. And I think when we read thrillers, that is the point. We like to be frightened, but we're safe at home in our beds reading or in an armchair reading. So, and I think we like to be scared like that. So, it is quite frightening if you think about it, but I'm glad I used it.
I was glad you did too. Like I said, I cannot recommend this book highly enough. It was so, so very good. For all of your existing fans and for fans who are new to you, Bernadette, where is the best place for folks to find you? Is it your website or social media?
Okay, so I have to admit, I'm not great on social media. I haven't been great on it. It's something that I find really hard to get to grips with, but I have just learned a lot more about it, and you're going to see a lot more of me on Instagram. So you can find me on Instagram. That's going to be my main platform now, because Twitter X I don't really use anymore. So you can find me on Instagram, and I also have a website, and I do have a newsletter that comes out a few times a year. It's meant to come out a few times. It just depends how busy I am. But then I do run giveaways as well on my website, my newsletter. So if you subscribe to my newsletter, I often give away books. And there's going to be a great giveaway coming up on Instagram. So if anybody wants to look, so I'm at EA Paris on both. You can find me there.
Perfect. Again, it is called When I Kill You, and it is phenomenal.
It's out on the 17th of February, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it hitting the shelves. Thank you so much for the interview. It's been lovely talking to you, Marie.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.